vivid verses.
The ledger of the last 22 months was a map of calculated risks and emotional investments that, in hindsight, had been trending toward a deficit long before the first shovel hit the dirt. I had authorized the release of $5.6 million in personal liquidity, capital that had been earned through a decade of high-frequency trading and strategic acquisitions, to build a monument to a woman I believed was my partner. It wasn't just a building. It was an architectural firm meant to redefine the skyline, a cathedral of glass and cantilevered steel that bore her name in brushed titanium on the lobby wall. Vesper and Associates. The gala was the culmination of that effort. The air in the atrium was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the ozone of high-end climate control. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, my back to the city that my money had helped her prepare to conquer. I wore a charcoal turtleneck and a tailored blazer, a deliberate choice of understated presence. I wasn't there to be the star. I was there to be the foundation. I watched Vesper navigate the room. She was a master of the social physics required for this level of success. She moved between Tier 1 developers, structural engineers, and city planners with a grace that I had always admired. Her parents, Alistair and Hester, stood near the champagne tower, glowing with the reflected light of their daughter's triumph. I noticed the subtle shifts, the way a predator notices a change in the wind. She hadn't looked at me once in the last hour. Her laughter was an octave higher than usual, a theatrical projection. I had been observing these data points for months. The late nights where the firm's security logs showed the building was empty, the encrypted messaging apps that appeared on her phone, the way our conversations had shifted from we to I. I hadn't reacted with suspicion or jealousy, because those are emotional responses to objective facts. I simply updated my internal model of our relationship and waited for the definitive proof. She stepped onto the mahogany podium, the room falling into a respectful hush. She thanked the lead designers, the contractors, the visionaries. Then, she turned her gaze toward me. It was a cold, sharp look, devoid of the warmth we had shared over blueprints and midnight coffee. And finally, she said, her voice steady and projecting through the high-fidelity speakers, I have to acknowledge my foundational phase husband, Soren. The phrase hung in the air like a localized frost. I saw Silas, my closest friend and a man who understood the mechanics of power as well as I did, go still in my peripheral vision. You know how it is in architecture, Vesper continued, her smile widening into something predatory. You use a basic prototype to work out the flaws. You build a temporary scaffold to support the structure until it can stand on its own. Soren served his function. He got the walls up. But every visionary knows when the scaffold has become an eyesore. It's time for a permanent partner, not a placeholder. A few people laughed, nervous, sycophantic titters from those who sensed the power shift and wanted to be on the winning side. She stepped down, walked directly to me, and handed me a thick, white envelope. Divorce papers executed on my end. Consider this the final invoice for your services, she said, her voice a low murmur intended only for me. She tapped my lapel with 2 fingers, a gesture of patronizing dismissal, and walked back to the microphone to discuss the firm's expansion into the European market. I didn't feel the heat of embarrassment. I didn't feel the urge to shout or plead. My frame, my perception of my own worth and the reality of the situation remained entirely intact. She had attempted to rewrite our history as a transaction. Fine. If it was a transaction, then we would use the rules of business. I pulled out my phone. I didn't look at the envelope. I sent 2 messages. The first was to my lead counsel, Mercer, a man who lived for the intricacies of contract law. Initiate the clawback protocols. Immediate emergency. Full liquidation of the holding company. The second was to my head of treasury. Terminate all credit lines. freeze the operational accounts, and revoke all third-party spending authorizations. Now, I walked toward the podium. The crowd parted for me, sensing a confrontation that I had no intention of giving them. I didn't look angry. I looked like a man who was about to close a deal. Vesper looked startled as I reached for the microphone. For a brief second, she tried to pull it back, but I maintained a firm, calm grip. One brief clarification for the room, I said, my voice resonating with a composed authority that seemed to physically push back the silence. As the sole equity financier and 100% owner of the holding company that backstops this firm, I am withdrawing all capital support and dissolving the entity effective immediately. The structural leases, the equipment contracts, and the payroll accounts are all tied to my personal liquidity. Since the scaffold is being removed, I'm sure you all understand that the building must now stand on its own. Good luck with the opening. I handed her the microphone. She tried to laugh it off, her voice cracking slightly. He's posturing. Soren has always been a bit dramatic with the checkbook. He wouldn't actually. I was already walking toward the exit. I didn't look back. I drove to my lake house, a 3-hour journey through the cooling night air. This was the property I had bought long before I met her, held in a shielded private trust. It was my fortress of solitude, a place where the variables were always under my control. My phone began a rhythmic, persistent vibration as soon as I hit the interstate. Her caller ID appeared. I silenced it. It rang again. I silenced it again. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway of the lake house, I had 22 missed calls and 14 text messages ranging from, "What the hell did you do?" to "We need to talk like adults." I ignored them all. I poured a glass of mineral water, sat on the deck overlooking the black expanse of the water, and felt the clarity that comes with a resolved situation. I wasn't grieving a marriage. I was acknowledging the termination of a bad investment. A text from Silas arrived. The firm is in total chaos. The developers are literally calling their lawyers from the parking lot. I've never seen a room empty that fast. You're a legend, Soren, or a monster. Possibly both. Me? I'm neither, Silas. I'm just a man who follows the terms of a breached contract. The next morning, the silence was broken by a heavy pounding on the door. I checked the security feed. It was Alistair, my father-in-law, or, more accurately, my former father-in-law. I opened the door, but did not move to invite him in. He was still in his tuxedo trousers, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked like he had aged a decade in 12 hours. "Soren, for God's sake," he started, his voice thick with exhaustion. "You've destroyed her. Do you have any idea what you've done? The suppliers are already sending repossession notices. The landlord for the studio downtown has locked the doors." "I haven't destroyed anything, Alistair," I said, my voice level. Vesper declared that I was a temporary scaffold. I simply took her at her word. A scaffold doesn't hang around once it's been told its job is done. The fact that she built her entire dream on a foundation she intended to discard is a failure of her engineering, not mine. She's your wife. She was a business partner who attempted to liquidate the majority shareholder without a buyout clause. That's a tactical error. We took a second mortgage, Alistair, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. $75,000 for the branding and the launch. We believed in her. If this firm folds, Hester and I lose the house. We're in our 60s. We can't start over. I looked at Alistair. I felt a twinge of something, not guilt, but a recognition of the collateral damage. Alistair had always been a decent man, if a bit weak-willed when it came to his daughter. That was an unwise financial decision, Alistair. You should have consulted me before tying your primary residence to a startup venture with no proven revenue stream. She said it was a sure thing. She said you were all in. I was, until I wasn't. Choices have trajectories, Alistair. Vesper chose the trajectory of public humiliation. This is where it leads. You're a cold bastard, he spat. I'm a composed one. There's a difference. If I were cold, I'd be enjoying this. I'm not. I'm simply observing the logical outcome of her actions. I closed the door. I spent the rest of the morning with my attorney, Mercer. We went through the bylaws of the holding company. Because the firm was pre-revenue and I was the sole provider of capital, the golden parachute clause she thought she had didn't apply. I had structured the investment as a convertible debt note. The moment she filed for divorce, the debt became due in full. She didn't have $5.6 million. She didn't have $56,000. By 2 p.m., my accountant called. The secondary operational account has $80,000 in it from small-scale family friends. Do you want to seize toward the debt? No, I said. Return every cent of those specific deposits to the original donors. I'm not interested in their money. I only want my capital back. Understood. Also, the equipment manufacturer for the large-scale 3D printers, they've already picked up the units. The lease was in your name only. Good. Process the returns and credit them to my primary treasury. That evening, a different car pulled into the drive. Not Vesper's, but a modest sedan I recognized. It was Briar, Vesper's younger sister. Briar was the outlier of the family, a researcher with a PhD in biology who had always looked at her sister's social climbing with a mix of amusement and pity. I opened the door, and this time I stepped aside. Briar, I assume you're here to tell me I'm a monster. No, she said, sitting at my kitchen table. I'm here because I'm the only one who isn't lying to themselves. And because I think you need to know the depth of the game she was playing. I poured her a glass of water. Go on. Vesper didn't just decide to do this last night. She's been planning it for a year. She's been involved with Sterling Thorne, the lead structural engineer, since the firm was in the planning stages. He's the one she wants to be her actual partner. I nodded slowly. The name Sterling Thorne fit the data points I collected. I suspected as much. The travel expenses didn't line up with the project sites. It's worse than that, Soren. She's been telling our parents and her friends that you were the one being distant. She's been painting a picture of you as a controlling, emotionally abusive husband who was using money to keep her trapped. She wanted the public humiliation to be her liberation story. She thought it would make her an icon in the industry, the woman who broke free from the cold financier to build her own world. A compelling narrative, I remarked. Common, but effective if the audience is receptive. She's going to lie in the settlement, Soren. Her lawyer, Gable, has a reputation for being a shark. They're going to claim you promised the $5.6 million as a gift, not a loan. They're going to try to paint your withdrawal as financial domestic violence. She's even talking about filing for a protective order to keep you away from the assets. I looked at Briar. And why are you telling me this? You'll be exiled from your family if they find out. Because you were the only one who actually treated me like a person and not a secondary character in Vesper's life, she said firmly. And because I hate seeing a perfectly good structure destroyed by a bad architect. Vesper is a narcissist, Soren. She doesn't see people, she sees tools. And I'm tired of watching her break her tools when she's done with them. I appreciate the intel, Briar. Document everything, Soren. She's going to try to rewrite the last 4 years. Don't let her. After she left, I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I spent the night in my study, compiling every text message, every bank statement, and every email from the last 22 months. I had preserved everything. I had logs of the nights I had stayed up helping her with her presentations, receipts for the jewelry I'd bought her parents, and, most importantly, the signed contracts that clearly stated the $5.6 million was a callable investment, not a gift. The next day, Vesper finally arrived. She didn't knock. She used her key, only to find it wouldn't turn. I watched her on the security camera as she struggled with the lock, her frustration visible in the set of her shoulders. I opened the door before she could start pounding. She looked different without the gala lighting. She looked desperate. "Soren, stop this. This has gone way too far. You've locked the accounts. The payroll for the staff bounced this morning. Do you have any idea what that does to my reputation? Your reputation was a project I funded, Vesper. When you ended the partnership, you ended the funding. This is the natural consequence of your own declaration. I was making a point. I wanted you to see that I'm more than just your wife. You succeeded. You're now a woman with no firm, no funding, and a very public divorce pending. Is it the point you were aiming for?" She pushed past me into the house. I didn't stop her. I simply stood by the door, my frame unmoved. "You can't do this. My lawyer says the money was a marital contribution. You can't just take it back." "Your lawyer's misinformed," I said. "The funds were moved from my premarital trust into a specialized holding company. The contracts you signed as CEO of the firm acknowledge those funds as debt, not equity. You should have read the fine print, Vesper. I know you prefer the aesthetics of a contract over the mechanics, but the mechanics are what keep the building from falling down. I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone what you're really like. I'll tell them how you've been gaslighting me for years, making me feel small, controlling every penny. You can certainly try," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But Breyer was here last night. I know about Sterling Thorne. I know about the liberation narrative you've been drafting. And I have the metadata from your private phone, the one you thought I didn't know about, showing exactly when and where your business trips took place." She went pale. The cold, composed mask she tried to wear slipped. "You spied on me. I observed the data you provided. You were careless, Vesper. You assumed that because I didn't react with emotion, I wasn't paying attention. That was your biggest mistake. I'm always paying attention." "Soren, please," she said, her voice shifting into a softer, more manipulative tone. "We had 4 years. We were happy. Can't we just find a middle ground? If you reinstate the funding, I'll issue a public apology. We can say the gala thing was a misunderstanding, a joke that went wrong. An apology doesn't refund $5.6 million. And a joke doesn't unsign divorce papers. You wanted a partner who was an actual partner, not a placeholder. You have Sterling for that now. I wish you both the best of luck in finding an investor who is as placeholder as I was." "You're a monster," she whispered. "No, I'm just a guy who stopped paying for the play once he realized it was a tragedy." I signaled for the security guard I'd hired to step out from the kitchen. "Vesper, you've stayed beyond your welcome. Your things from the city apartment will be delivered to your parents' house by the end of the week. Please leave." She left, her heels clicking aggressively on the gravel. I felt nothing but the satisfaction of a clean break. The next few weeks were a storm of legal activity. Gable, her attorney, sent a 10-page demand letter filled with the abuse and control allegations Breyer had warned me about. They were seeking half of my total net worth, plus the reinstatement of the firm's capital. My attorney, Mercer, called me. "They're swinging for the fences, Soren. They want a settlement meeting on Friday. They're threatening to go to the press with the abuse allegations if we don't play ball." "No settlement," I said. "I want a deposition. I want her under oath, and I want to present the discovery materials we've gathered. We aren't playing defense, Mercer. We're playing truth." The deposition room was a sterile box of glass and white light. Vesper sat across from me, flanked by Gable, who looked like he'd spent too much time in tanning beds. I sat with Mercer, my expression neutral. "Mr. Soren," Gable began, leaning forward with a predatory grin. "We have statements from several of Mrs. Vesper's friends detailing your controlling nature. You required her to submit budgets for her personal spending. You isolated her from her family. You used your wealth as a weapon to keep her compliant. Isn't that true?" "It is not," I said. I provided my wife with a $15,000 monthly discretionary allowance, separate from the firm's budget. I have the bank statements showing she spent $40,000 on a single trip to the Maldives with a group of friends that actually consisted of one person, Sterling Thorne. As for isolating her, I paid off her parents' debt 3 times in 4 years and funded her sister's PhD research. I have the wire confirmations here. Mercer slid the documents across the table. Gable's grin faltered as he flipped through the pages. We also have a recording, I continued, of a conversation between Mrs. Vesper and her sister, where Mrs. Vesper explains that she intends to drain the placeholder, referring to me, until the firm is solvent, and then discard me for a more architecturally compatible partner. This was a bluff. I didn't have a recording, but I had a detailed, signed affidavit from Breyer that was as good as one. Vesper looked at Gable, her eyes wide with panic. Furthermore, Mercer added, the $5.6 million was structured as a series of loans to the holding company. Since the CEO, Mrs. Vesper, has admitted in a public forum that the scaffold has served its purpose, the debt is now fully matured per the acceleration clause in Section 4.2. We are filing for an immediate judgment against all of the firm's physical and intellectual property. You can't do that, Vesper shouted. We already did, Mercer said. The court granted the preliminary injunction an hour ago. The firm's assets are now in receivership. The room went silent. The liberation story was falling apart. The abused narrative had been incinerated by the cold, hard reality of bank statements and signed affidavits. Gable leaned back, his bravado gone. We'd like to take a 10-minute recess. Take as long as you want, I said, but the offer on the table is 0. She leaves with what she brought in, which was a degree and a dream. I keep the rest, and if the abuse allegations reach the press, I'll file a defamation suit that will keep her in court for the next 20 years. It didn't take 10 minutes. They took 2 hours. When they came back, Vesper looked like she had been crying. She signed the dissolution of the marriage and the waiver of all claims to the firm's assets. Outside the building, I saw Alistair and Hester waiting. They looked at me with a mix of shame and desperation. I walked over to them. The check I wrote for the mortgage, I said to Alistair. It's been cleared. You won't lose the house. But don't ever ask me for another cent. And tell your daughter that the next time she builds a structure, she should make sure the foundation is made of something more substantial than lies. Soren, Alistair started. We're done, Alistair. I walked my car. Silas was waiting in the passenger seat. So, is it over? It's resolved, I said. There's a difference. What are you going to do now? You got your $5.6 million back. You got your life back. I'm going to go for a walk with the dog, I said. And then I'm going to look for a new investment. Something with a better structural integrity. 3 months later, the dust had settled. Vesper had taken a job as a junior associate at a firm in a different state, her visionary status tarnished by the spectacular collapse of her own venture. The architectural community is small. Word of her foundational phase husband comment had spread, and not in the way she'd hoped. People don't like to work with people who bite the hand that feeds them. It makes the other hands nervous. The firm's building was sold to a medical group. The titanium letters were taken down and replaced with something more functional. I heard through Breyer that Vesper and Sterling had broken up shortly after the deposition. Apparently, Sterling wasn't as interested in being a permanent partner when the scaffold wasn't there to pay the bills. Alistair and Hester sent me a card every month with a small check, $500 toward the loan. I didn't cash them, but I didn't return them either. It was important for their dignity to try to pay me back. I sat in my lake house, watching the sun set over the water. My phone buzzed. It was a message from a new founder I was considering backing, a young woman with a plan for sustainable housing. Founder, I've attached the updated budget and the risk assessment you asked for. I want to be completely transparent about the potential for failure. Me, transparency is the only thing that keeps a structure standing. I'll review it tonight. I close the laptop. People often ask me if I regret the $5.6 million. If I feel like I lost 4 years of my life to a lie. I tell them no. I didn't lose anything. I bought a very expensive, very clear view of the truth. I learned that my self-worth isn't tied to someone else's perception of me. I learned that you can't be gaslit if you trust your own observations. And I learned that a scaffold might be temporary, but a man who knows how to build one will never be without a roof over his head. The truth is worth every penny. And for the first time in 22 months, the ledger was perfectly balanced.
Thanks for listening.